My name is Professor Beverley Raphael. I'm Head of Psychological Medicine for the Medical School, Professor of Psychological Medicine at the Australian National University. I'm also Chair of the Australian Child and Adolescent Trauma, Loss and Grief Network at that university. Schools, of course, are a centre place for communities. If we look at where communities connect most, families with children connect most to other people through school settings. That's where relationships are made, where the kids make relationships, and the parents too come together in the needs and interests of their children. We know from much work that's been done in the field of disaster and other adversities that being back at school, being centred at school, is a vital part of recovery. But we also know that schools are complex places. We know kids can have difficulties and problems, challenging behaviours, withdrawal, difficulties in their educational process that call for great talents and strengths amongst teachers. And most of us who've had anything to do with children or schools recognise the great resources teachers bring, both educationally and personally. Now, when teachers have been through a major disaster themselves, as has happened with the Victorian Bushfire, and they've had a doubly challenging time. They've had the challenging time of handling their own experience and the horror of what happened in that disaster. And they have to handle whatever that meant for them as it happened to them and their families, and at the same time be responsive to the impact on their school as a community and to the children in it and their families. And these, we know, are very challenging circumstances in the fact that dealing with your own needs and dealing with the kids' needs at the same time can call on great resources and can be quite overwhelming if the situation is very sensitive and difficult. So first of all, we have to talk about teachers and looking after themselves. And in this circumstance, we're very interested in how teachers can mobilise some of their strengths and some of the particular strengths that you have as a teacher to get into an environment of self-care. One of the important things is making sure that you're part of a network. Doing this by yourself is very hard. Within your school setting, you're part of a network of the organisation of the school. Using that in ways which can help support you through tough times is an important part of it. Sometimes this is called a peer support group, but it really has to be a group where you can sit down and talk about what's worrying, what's stressful for you in the work you do in the school setting, and how you can get some backup there if you need to. The second part of the process is looking at their strengths and perhaps running through some of the preparedness things that are relevant for them. Teachers bring particular strengths about understanding children and their developmental stage, depending what level of schooling they're teaching in. They understand the behavioural issues and how children as students can represent their distress, their sort of withdrawal things, and they bring a set of skills which are important in handling it. They also, in most instances, are tuned into the children's distress levels, because that's both upsetting for the child and the class, but also disruptive of the child's learning processes. And using those skills again in these circumstances, those basic skills, is important. It runs on two channels for the teachers, because it's both preparedness to deal with their own needs and preparedness so that they can effectively deal with the charges in their care, because they're in the place of parents in some settings and have responsibilities. Coming back to some of the self-care skills are critical. And self-care skills are things like knowing about your feelings is critical for all of us in a preparedness situation. And it's part of many programs in schools, how kids learn about their feelings too. So knowing about your feelings, knowing about what makes you fearful, tackling it bit by bit, giving yourself some good periods within that time so that you're tuned into, you're not totally loaded in the anxiety-provoking circumstances. Trying to manage the amount of stress you have to handle so you don't get it all in one huge thrust. The support of other people is critical to us all. Research has shown that throughout many decades, having someone you can share something with, offloading it a bit, helping them as well, can make a big difference in how you cope with preparing yourself and dealing with ongoing stress you might have as a consequence, or stress you fear coming in the future. And then the strength also lies in knowing that you can effectively do the tasks that are in your role. So your effective teaching tasks in day-to-day ways and your effective preparation tasks should there be an emergency at your school, the two sets of things. So your teaching tasks, again, if they become difficult because you're stressed, going back to your peer group or your backup people, your mentors, your principal, and talking that through is important. If you're worried about a kid, turn to the appropriate support agencies within your school, like the school's support officers, and engage the parents. But the learning trajectory is so helpful and important for children's recovery as well as your own feeling of capacity and capability, that coming back to that as the focal area and comforting kids and comforting yourself through that is an important task, even if you tackle it bit by bit in different ways. And then the second thing is working with your principal and other senior leaders in the school about what the challenges are in terms of the organisational response should an emergency occur, and having a practice at it. And a lot of the preparedness is really about getting people to tap into personal strengths, their personal courage that's got them to this stage in life. Understanding helplessness can undermine that, and coming back to what they've been able to do and what can work well for them in this circumstance, and to the aspects of their tasks and actions which we know are really important in helping you feel effective again and getting on top of things. Capacity to act is one of the big things, so practicing what you could act at can also help reinforce that, as can your support networks. With respect to helping the children, the more your role is not to be a mental health professional as a teacher, but to understand children's well-being and how things like this experience and the disruptions and the fears can disrupt children's well-being. Being tuned in, as I said before, is a skill that teachers have. Tuning it in for this extra thing and thinking that particularly the children who are being really disruptive in class, really difficult, thinking back, well, I know this the way he or she usually behaves, but probably this is worse because of the fires, because of the coming season, because of these things. How can we focus on getting this child tuned into the strengths and actions that will be helpful? They're important things to know. The net outcome of being prepared, net outcomes are multiple. First of all, you're in a much better circumstance should the potential threat of a disaster come, bushfires, cyclones or other disasters, even an earthquake like we had in Newcastle, for example. You're better prepared if you've got an emergency bag, and that's relevant if there's a bad motor vehicle accident in any of the sorts of things that can happen. The second thing is we know honing those skills can build up your personal strengths to handle the everyday challenges in life, which can happen in all circumstances and all families. There's been a lot over the years of understanding of all the bad effects of trauma and grief, and that's been a field in which I've worked for a long time. And its impact, those things can impact profoundly on children. But we have also more recently recognised courage in children and strengths in children as a critical part, and the similar things are relevant for adult life. Recent research has highlighted courage is a very significant thing in children, and that it really does see them through some of these tough times, and most children have it, just as most of us have hope built into us somewhere. Some are more optimistic than others, but tuning into those things is part of building a positive repertoire for life. Schools are complex places, families are complex places, communities are complex places. There are never simple answers, and it's really important that we be kind and compassionate to ourselves, and we look after ourselves physically with exercise and good food and proper sleep and all those things, and we look after ourselves emotionally. We've been much better at keeping physically fit than emotionally fit, and a lot of these things help build your emotional fitness and your mental fitness as well as your physical fitness. So they're important toolkits to have more broadly to handle the ups and downs of life.